Hey, this is Rick again with another update for ASL. As you can see, I've got Notepad++ open as usual, and I have my index.js in the roots folder, and I have the fruits.pug file open as well. So there's a lot of stuff going on here. I've got a for loop to loop through all of the fruits that are passed from the route file. And essentially what we're doing here is we're rooting through all of the fruits that are returned from the database, of which the connection is right here in index.js. So we're looping through all of those, and we're creating multiple forms actually. And all the forms have a specific ID based on the ID of the fruit itself in the database. So every fruit has its own ID essentially. It's an automatic incrementing value. So we loop through, give each form its own ID, and then we just set the action to /fruits. Method is post. So essentially we're just posting it to the same address we're at right here in the web browser. And then from there we have a container. We're using a third-party framework to get the desired styling and layout for all of this basically. And then we have the add new fruit form here, and that's just another form that is just posted to the same URL. Let's see. We have a button element that acts as a submit button. Its name is called add and its value is add. Now you're going to see later I add the value, add or delete, edit or delete, and there's a reason why I do that. But anyways, that's the form for adding a fruit, and then beneath here we have another container, then we just have a table, and we got the first row, which is basically all of our headers. So we got all the table headers right there, and then on top of that, well, should I say below that, we have the table body, and then we do another for loop, loop through the fruits again, and then for every iteration we create a new table row, and we create 4 new table cells essentially. And what I did here was I have a read-only input, I have a text input, and the read-only, by the way, is for the fruit ID. You don't want that to be edited. They have the name of the fruit as a text input that can be edited, and then you have 2 submit buttons. Whichever one is clicked will be the one that determines what action we do essentially. This is something I figured out, I believe it was last month in SSL. I figured out that what I can do is I can have a table, loop through all these fruits essentially, and basically I can make multiple submit buttons for a single form, but it only acts on whichever is actually clicked on. Like the action of the form depends on which submit button is clicked. And that kind of goes back to why I have a value for these buttons essentially. So as you can see, I got a value for the edit button. I just set it to edit. Honestly, I could probably set it to anything, doesn't really matter, but I just keep everything the same, edit, and then the delete button has a value of delete. So they are buttons, HTML button elements, but I set the type of them to a submit, which makes them act like a submit button for a form. Now because of that value, and because of the fact that we set the form attribute to the form ID of the edit form that we iterated through earlier, we can go back to the index.js and we create a new post method. So we do router.post/fruits. Now here's where it gets interesting, and I should actually comment this too. So depending on which submit button is actually clicked, one of those three actions happens. Now, I don't know why that is. You would think that a form could only have a single submit button, but for some reason when you submit an HTML form that has more than one submit button, it will not read the value of the submit button that you didn't press. It only reads the value of the one that you did press. So for example, if I click on the delete button, if I go back here, my request body will have the delete set, but because the edit button wasn't clicked, it will not have the edit post variable set, which is weird because we submit the form and this edit button is part of that form based on the form attribute there, but for some reason it's just not counted unless it's actually clicked on. So that's a nice little trick there, so you don't have to make multiple forms or anything like that basically. So essentially, if we hit the add submit button, we change this variable here, which is Q. It starts off as blank, and then we change the query. That's what the Q variable is, depending on which button is clicked. So if the add button is clicked, we insert into the table, and then we insert, the name that is submitted from that form for the fruit name. And then if the edit button is clicked, we set the name to the new name that we entered, where the ID is the read-only ID. And then of course if we click the delete button, it just deletes where the ID matches the read-only ID. And then from there we just perform this query first. Whatever Q is set to, we perform that query first, and within the callback for that query, as long as the query is successful, we just output the fruits page again. Actually, see, we have the response.render, we have the fruits page, and we're setting the title to fruits. I did this when I was developing this. The -s just tells me that the form was submitted successfully, and then we set the fruits variable to the results of this query here, which is just selecting all the fruits that we have left, so everything's kept up to date essentially. So I'm going to demo it right here. First we're going to add a fruit, and I'm going to add an apple. So apple's at the bottom here. But let's say I want to add, excuse me, not add, let's say I want to change apple to watermelon. Click on the edit button, edits it successfully. And if I want to delete watermelon, just click on delete. If I want to delete pear, just click delete there. And if I want to delete cranberry, just click the delete button there. And of course I can still add values. And I can still delete all of them. But other than that, that's basically all that I had to say for this video. It's create, read, update, and delete. It's the Crud functionality there. Thanks again so much for watching. Have a good one.